Is owning comics better than renting them via a subscription? Todd and I dive deep into this and other questions on today's Panelism.
Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comic books and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. A very stuffy nose, Taylor Trask. I've had a allergy thing going on the last couple of days. It's almost over, but you may hear me sound a little nasalier, or you may hear me blow my nose in the background. Hopefully not, but just getting that out of the way right out of the gate.
Yeah, well, I'm planning on clearing my throat a lot during this podcast, so get ready for that too.
This is the month. These are the days of the illnesses.
Yeah, and you know the sounds and sniffles of amateur podcasting.
Yeah, there's always that gap, right? There's always that like we're in it. It's like four plus weeks, you know, right before daylight savings time kicks back in again, where it's just like, you know, everything seems like it's a little too dark, a little too cold. You're like, God, is this reality now? And then everything kind of changes mid-March. Like, oh, there, thank God.
Well, what we have in Orange County at least is like we have this weird warm period in the very onset of winter. It's like, you know, time changes, it gets darker, it gets cooler, and then from like Christmas to February, it's lovely. And we don't tell anybody about it because that's when we all go to Disneyland. And it's so great, and then it's like almost a little too warm. Like, this is so weird.
And then, folks.
And then February starts, and it's like rainy and shitty and cold, and it's totally weird. I mean, thank God for the rain. Like, it's unbelievable right now. I can see snow-capped peaks like almost from my house. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
How close are you to Palm Springs? Random question.
Oh, very far.
Very far?
I mean, at least 90 miles, probably more like 100 and something.
Oh, that's right. You're south of San Diego, right?
No. San Diego's like in Mexico. I'm between San Diego and Los Angeles.
Okay.
And so Palm Springs is like way inland.
Oh, okay.
Not way. I mean, it's 90 miles ish, but it's, you know.
That's like an hour and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's not so bad.
Palm Springs is there's a fantastic like single peak there. I guess there are actually more. And I took my parents there in the spring one year, and we rode this lift up to this mountain, and we're like in the snow. It was
God damn it. So okay, moral of that story: if you're down in the dumps this winter, come to charming Palm Springs.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they got a couple great music fests. I hear it's really easy to get tickets.
The reason I asked, the cryptic reason why I asked if you were close to Palm Springs is very, very close to Hemet County. And if you know anything about Hemet County.
Hemet's not far. Hemet is closer to me than Palm Springs.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like between, but yeah.
That was a joke, a very deep reference joke for some of our listeners who, if you know what that means, it's kind of hopefully kind of funny. But if you don't, look up Hemet County and just see what you see.
Yeah.
See what you see.
An update on the weather before.
Let's turn now to Todd for the weather. Todd, what you got down there?
Before we hit record, I said, I'm turning the heater on, and I just turned it off. It took 2 minutes, and I was like, whoo, too hot.
Rest assured that the heat in Todd's apartment is off. Well, let's get into it because this will be a meaty discussion. If you came here, you know our episode is going to be about this topic of ownership versus subscription. And this is kind of a veering off of a normal Panelism episode. You know, we've gotten in this nice groove where we review a book every week and have a little discussion about it. Once upon a time, we had the Todd and Taylor show where we talked about, you know, various sort of evergreen concepts and topics and things, sometimes on creativity, sometimes on, you know, the process or the what is sci-fi, you know, what is all these kinds of things. So we kind of wanted to go back to a few of those, and we had some juicy topics, I guess, or juicy questions we'd been noodling on off to the side, and thought this would be a good one.
It seems like frequently too, in our last few book discussions, we've said, "Hey, let's put a pin in that because there's a larger discussion on one of
Yeah.
these topics," and
Oh,
this
good
is one
point.
of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is definitely one of them. So it's like, I've toyed with things like comicsology off and on, and it always kind of brings me back to this almost fundamental philosophical question of when it comes to comics and graphic novels, ownership versus subscription. How do you feel about those things? How do they influence how you feel about the work? There's just a lot of questions we can delve into and sort of kick around.
Yeah,
So,
I totally agree. And it's also, I mean, just to make clear, I mean, what we're talking about is, as far as I know, the only one available is Comixology with its unlimited
well, I mean,
subscription.
Marvel's got an app, DC's got
Okay,
it.
yeah, good point. Good point. So, and
I mean,
ownership being
this is
like buying.
DC Universe is a good entity to continue to come back to during this discussion because they have not only the digital subscription of comics, but all their other DC stuff is bundled into it, Prime style. And so, what does that mean for the future of comics? Like, there's so many ways to take this, but I want to start with kind of a fundamental breakdown of what we mean by ownership and what we mean by subscription, just so we're, I think,
yeah,
aligned.
Exactly. I was trying to jump ahead there.
Yeah, no worries.
Go ahead.
Which it's tempting to, but like, in ownership in media and specifically ownership in comics, like I don't want to get into like some Keynesian discussion on the economic imperative of ownership and blah blah blah. But as it relates to you physically owning books, it evolved out of the idea of owning just regular books, collecting anything of value. Books have always seemed to kind of been that thing that, other than jewelry, that people just always have kept around. So this idea of owning a book and specifically and showcasing on your shelf. Now, when you talk about comics / graphic novels, we'll just say comics for the catch-all phrase of all graphic storytelling. When it comes to that, it's that extra benefit of you got the books on your shelf, but it's also a little art gallery in its own right. You kind of feel like it's almost like that extra level. At least for me, there's a lot of people when they own the book, it's almost like people who used to own CDs. They just kind of stuff them all in a giant thing and don't really think about them, beyond that. So it kind of runs a spectrum.
I like the way you put that, having your own little art gallery, because that to me is such an argument, not only for ownership of comic books, but for the physical ownership of it, because it becomes, that object of art that you've got in your house. And I think one of the big things that we've probably mentioned before, but where CDs always felt like they were sort of grasping at a previous generation's ownership thing. Like, when I stopped using CDs, I didn't miss putting CDs in a player really, but I can see how vinyl records have that appeal and that collectors, when you have a beautiful shelves full of vinyl records, you do have that art, on display in a great way. Where CD, at one point, it was just so commoditized. It was like every jewel case looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
Until you pull it out and like pull out the liner notes, there's no real art. So
well, and you're looking at a much smaller representation of that album art than you would have on a vinyl. Anyways, you feel extra cheated. I mean, it speaks to the larger question of why in 2019 do we own media at all? I think on the one side, it's easy to kind of think of like, well, why would I own DVDs or Blu-rays when if I have a reliable internet connection, I can literally get anything I want to either rent or buy or stream as part of my subscription. I don't have to own another piece of plastic that's just sitting there. It's like that makes a lot of sense. And to your point, like CDs and jewel cases about the, kind of the same thing. As you get more deliberate with the media, if the book, a paperback book is not as valuable as its hardcover version is not as valuable as like, a limited press version or an antique version or, some, high level of the cover. As it becomes more intentional, it becomes more interesting to physically own, I think. But it is this question of with so much media to consume on a just ongoing basis, like, how are you, I often even ask myself, like when I buy books, like what is qualifying this particular book for ownership, physical ownership versus, owning on an iPad or just renting it as like part of Comixology. It kind of keeps swirling in my mind. I mean, how do you, is this way too deep for the average buyer? Am I going, is this way too esoteric?
No, I mean, I think one of the promises of like, God, I don't even know how to describe it without using this corny phrase of like digital revolution or something, was that feeling of like, oh, we're going to free ourselves from all this stuff we own
Mm-hmm.
that we do, that we can just play from any device. I've,
And it can all spark joy for us, and we don't have to have it in the way. And
but now we're faced with all these
Marie
other,
Kondo apparently.
yeah, no, I have, but now we're faced with this other dilemma of like there's almost there's many other dilemmas here. And I don't want to throw too many out there. I know we've got a great outline to hit. But there's definitely that there's almost a more ephemeral quality to it now,
Mm-hmm.
because there's this sort of what do I want to say? It's like a false scarcity of stuff, like there's some stuff you can get on these subscription services and there's some stuff you can't. It's like in my Google Play Music subscription, there are some albums that I own that just don't exist on Google Play. So I can only listen to them on a CD, and there's meaningful art in those things that I can't access with my, digital utopia Nirvana device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, because you don't, I mean, it does. Music and books, I think, are on one side. I keep thinking in terms of spectrums. Like music and books are on one side of the spectrums. Like TVs, like TV shows and DVDs, are probably on the other side of that spectrum. Because it's rare to walk into somebody's house these days and they go, "Let me show you my DVD collection." It's
right.
Or that's a status symbol as it once was. Where like you walk into somebody's living room or something, the more they have sort of showcase, the cooler they are. Like that just doesn't. You don't see that. It's almost like you walk into the situations like, God, why do you still own all this? Like,
yeah, I know.
Why is this still here? Like, why hasn't this been recycled? So it's never been a concern because those products, the way you enjoy them is not the physical. It's never been the physicality of those things. Never, ever, ever, ever. I mean, even the limited edition box set stuff, that's just the package. Like you're still the content is the actual thing. Whereas you get to music and then especially in books, the book is the package is the content in terms of books. Music is always in this weird sort of unreal space because you have with radio being around so long, there's a certain stream of music that you always just expect to have out in the ether that you pluck at when you want it, and you don't have to worry about it. And then the stuff that's your favorite album, ownership of that thing increases your favorability of that thing. Yeah, with music, at least it has with me. It's like if I own that CD, it's like I have a much. Even if I don't I don't hold it, I don't clutch it in my hands as I walk around, but just knowing that I own it, that I physically have it, gives me a sort of a higher, like, oh, that's that album, that's that. So it doesn't just kind of pass in the background. It actually has sort of some attachment to me.
Well, and I would bet that part of our attachment to those things is also based on the time it took for us to consume it. Because I think of there are movies I own that most movies I own, I'm not afraid to state it that way, I have watched fewer times than most music I own, than I've listened to most music I own. You know what I mean? It only takes me 45 minutes to listen to a record. Well, I might listen to that record 4 times in one day, but it takes me 2 hours to watch a movie. I'm less likely to repeat view it, even if I own it, but there's a different instinct there. Maybe I'm going way off the rails here, but a comic book or just a traditional book, with the things in it that are made of letters that mean things. Those words, those are, it's like it takes so much longer to get through that the physical object almost means something more. It's like there's books I don't want to get rid of, but I know I'm never going to read it again.
Oh, it's same. Totally.
Yeah.
Both in non-comics and with comics. I have a bookshelf stuff that's and a lot of those I bought on Kindle just so in case, one day I was getting antsy, I'd have it at least, or I found some digital version of it. But, it's the books I'm moving on the physical, just regular books side of the shelf. I'm kind of, I don't, I really, if it's an antique, I'll get it. If it's interesting in antique, or if it has some kind of unique, interesting, if it's really well made or well bound, that's interesting. But otherwise, I don't see the point. But I still own ownership of a book on my Kindle. Kind of still feels the same. It's not the aesthetic. And this is again just regular books. But when it comes to comics and graphic novels, it's almost the opposite, where the ownership of the physical thing means way more than ownership of it digitally. to the point where I'll get a book digitally, on Amazon or Comixology or whatever it is. And then like I'll own it up, I'll spend the full price for it so I can physically own it. But then I'll end up getting it again physically if I really, really like it. I bought all the White Knight single issues when they came out, but I had to buy the physical trade paperback because and I would have loved if they had put out a $10 more expensive like hardcover of it. I would have bought that instead because I kind of want the museum piece of this thing. The classier, more intentional it is, the higher likelihood I'll probably own it physically. At least for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely made those comments on our show before where I have enjoyed something so much. I mean, Unnatural's one. That was just a last week's episode.
A lot of listeners like that book.
Yeah, where I thought the artwork was so beautiful that, and you in your intro to this episode justified owning that, which is it becomes a little art gallery on my shelf. But I think this is a weird thing to say. I think I've crossed that Rubicon of of viewing my Comixology library almost the same as my physical comic book library, only in a very narrow definition of it, which is I own a lot of single issues of, and I haven't done this for years, but like it used to be, I would dig through the crates at the comic book store, and it's gotten to a point where I have things now in my Comixology library where I'm almost comfortable going, you know what? I'm probably never going to read that. But it was on sale. It's like we've mentioned many times, there was this huge Marvel sale last year that I alerted you to, and then I went crazy with. I could talk about that for the rest of the year and not have to, buy a new book. And then later in the year, there was a big DC sale on Amazon, and I didn't go as crazy, but I bought several books there, Crisis on Infinite Earths being one of them. I've definitely gotten that point on my Kindle. Like you and I have talked about this Japanese word sundoku, which is just these piles of unread books. Yeah. And I used to have this great anxiety about, oh my gosh, every time I buy a book on my Kindle, like for Kindle, I'm just adding to that sundoku that I don't even get to enjoy the sight of these books because they're all just on this little digital black and white device, But I've gotten over that. I've just decided, you know what? It's fine if I have 1,000 books on this Kindle and never read them, because I'm not going out and buying a lot of like $14.99 Kindle books. But if they sell a book for 99 cents, I just feel like, you know what? That's how I bought so many books when I was younger. I would just went to used bookstores and, grab them for 50 cents, $1, whatever. So yeah, if Amazon, I'll buy that History of Scotland someday. I might be interested in that.
Okay. Well,
that's there with comic books.
That is a great transition point because, I would think that's a great argument for then just get a Kindle subscription or a Comixology subscription that lets you access kind of a, near infinite virtual library, a Spotify for books, essentially. I mean, Kindle's got it now. And, obviously Comixology exists. There's this weird sort of hump that you go over when it's like, okay, when I'm buying them, even if they're like cheap, 99 cents or whatever it is, and I own them in my library, I'm okay if I never end up reading them. Even if they were full price or something, I'm just like, I have it. I've participated in supporting that artist, at some level. Or I've got it if I ever need it. It's like, hey, if I'm ever on a plane, I'm like, oh shit, but when you have a subscription is essentially the same thing. There's some titles notwithstanding, but like, it just feels a little more different. Like when all of a sudden you're accessing this thing, you're not physically, you're not owning it digitally or physically. You're not owning it in the sense of like, this file is mine, or whatever. I mean, and we'll just sidestep the whole discussion of like, but it's not really, you don't really own it. You're just licensing the file, blah, blah. Like I get all that, but just like for the sake of the conversation, when you buy a Kindle book, or you buy a Comixology book, you own it, for the duration of your existence. So it's like when you transition to that subscription, like a subscription in terms of TV and music makes perfect sense to me because it's like, for me, it's like the albums that aren't on Spotify, I still I've ripped. So like, I have the high quality, file, and it just kind of blends into my library. So it's all there. And I'd much rather spend $12 a month to get access to all this stuff than to have to spend, like probably $36 to $52 a month, maybe, when it was buying individual CDs or whatever it might be. So it's like, that makes sense to me. When all of a sudden it's books, I don't know why. Even though like a lot of people, you'll read, with a regular book, you might read it once ever, and then it sits on your shelf for forever and you never come back to it. So then why physically have it? A subscription makes perfect sense. But yet we're still, when it comes to books, and especially with comics and graphic novels, there's this weird jump that you have to make. And I've noticed, I'll let you, sorry, I keep ranting. I've noticed,
I got a rant of my own that I'm building steam on behind the scenes.
And I've noticed too, when I've used Comixology, the subscription service, I sort of undervalue the books a little bit more, and I don't like that feeling. Anyway, go ahead.
No, that is a great point. And I'll tell you what the rub of this, like the devil in the details there, is that unfortunately now those subscription services have that artificial scarcity, whether it's on purpose from the owner of the service, like whether it's Kindle doing that to try to get you to buy more Kindle books that you want, or whether it's some crazy publishing, agreement that you couldn't possibly fathom or solve at any point. The problem is so last year looked really hard at that Kindle Unlimited subscription for that very reason. And I don't remember what they were, but in the summer, there were a couple books I wanted to read. And I thought, you know what? I keep getting the 30-day offer from Kindle. I'm going to try it out. I did not try it out because the first thing I did was search for those books and they weren't available on Kindle Unlimited. The second thing I did was looked for them digitally in my local library. They weren't available. So I looked for them in print in my local library. They weren't available. So I was like, fuck it, and bought the books on Kindle.
Yeah.
And that is the big problem I'm having with Comixology. So the precursor to this event of you and I talking about this is that I'm trying out the 30-day subscription of Comixology Unlimited this month. And the rub there is the same. It's like volume 1 free, borrow it on Comixology Unlimited. Volume 2 and on, not available. And that is extremely frustrating. You get a discount on them as an unlimited customer. I get it, but it's not unlimited. Yeah. That's the thing that's so frustrating to me, is like, no, there's definitely limits.
Well, let's add into the mix then DC Universe, which is, the platform, the app itself, whether that be on your desktop or your phone or your tablet, that app gets you, basically most of DC's back catalog in terms of comics, plus all these new shows they're making, plus all these other sort of side things that, discounts in their store. It's basically DC World as a Prime membership, so you get all these other things. When that's the case, then you look at almost like something like Comixology Unlimited and just go, what's the point? It's does that incentivize, more people to kind of flock into these really gated communities? And then you have almost like TV, you've got Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, you'll have your DC app, your Marvel app, your Image app, tried that, early on before Comixology sort of merged it all together. I mean, Image used to have their own little Comixology slice/app. It might've been too soon.
It does not incentivize me. And there's a weird conscious decision there, which is it just actively aggravates me that there's another subscription. It's like how I can't watch TBS shows on Netflix or Hulu because they want me to have another subscription to like TBS's app or whatever. Or, I just, it's infuriating to me. I have enough subscriptions. Now I remember my other example. It's like Slate Plus.
Oh yeah.
Hear me now, Slate Plus. I just the other day tried to fill out their survey and it totally borked on me, but I was filling out the survey and at the end where you could leave comments, I'm going like, I'm never going to pay for your Plus system. Just put them on Stitcher. Like I will pay Stitcher for one place to have unlimited access to the podcasts I like. I would probably even approach that like a cable subscription where I paid, $1 a month for each different podcast. But what I won't do is have a subscription to Stitcher and a subscription to Slate Plus and a subscription to Cafe and like that drives me crazy.
Well, then on top of that, if you do like stop subscribing to the Bret Easton Ellis podcast because he's on Patreon now, and you have to listen to them through Patreon. They included like a link that they were like, you can listen to us on, once you're paying, use a special link in your favorite podcast app. I tried it on Pocket Cast and Apple Podcasts just to see, and it didn't work at all. So I'm like, okay, I'm not listening to podcasts or Patreon where I can't even like save my play. It's just like, it is bizarre that Stitcher or Spotify or Pocket Cast or like these podcast platforms haven't done exactly what you said, which is, look, we'll handle all of the transactional stuff. You guys just tell us what you want. There doesn't have to be any exclusivity if you don't want, or if you do, that's fine too. So it's like Comixology was trying to be that, to bring it back to this. That was. For comics, that's what they were trying to do. So, like, it makes business sense for DC to do what they did with Universe. Marvel's version is tricky because the Disney app sort of supersedes a lot of what Marvel would do. So, Marvel can still do the comics piece and, a lot of the ancillary sort of store stuff and brand stuff. But they're not going to get to do the TV shows and all of that, at least not yet. So it's, Image couldn't do it. They would, that'd be amazing. If Image had one, but all the Image creator deals are kind of all over the place, especially now. So it's, that's going to be, it almost, as I'm rationalizing through that, it almost makes just the idea of ownership in the comic space, like, seem all the easier. It's like, look, I don't have to deal with any of that if I just own the book.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing about Marvel's platform. Like, I don't know what the plan or threat or whatever you want to call it is for them to yank all the Marvel movies from Netflix, but it's sort of like, hey, whenever you do that, I mean, you're pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to buy 3 or 4 of them on that day, because I'm going to want to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp or Black Panther at some point, but no, I don't want to subscribe to your dumb Disney platform for all this shit. Like that also infuriates me, because it's, I guess it's another walled garden kind of thing of like, I don't know how to process my distaste for that. But part of it is that I've gotten over the personal like frustration and stigma with something like Netflix. Like I don't have a Pirate Bay mentality of like, I should just be able to, download any show I want for free anywhere. I'm happy to pay, but just make it easy for me and give me a variety, which is what Netflix and Hulu give me. Don't push me only into your universe.
It's funny you mentioned Pirate Bay, because I was that guy until Netflix made it stupid easy. And then, most TV shows, even if it wasn't on Netflix, and then at least like, hey, buy it on Amazon and iTunes the next day. Like, okay, great. That's all I asked for. Just a simple way to get this, not 6 months later.
Yeah. And that was, and it still has informed my complete resistance to iTunes but in the early days, I just didn't use iTunes at all, because you couldn't take those songs with you. You couldn't play them on another device.
Oh, because there was DRM early on.
There was DRM, and they wouldn't, I think at one point they wouldn't even download them as like MP3s or anything. You could only have that like proprietary Apple M4A or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, like you've made it like piracy exists as an easier route around complexity sometimes. It's so that's what Marvel and DC are doing. It's making things more complex for us.
Yeah, that's it, man.
And I think that was like Image was trying to split the difference there for a while. I wasn't aware of their app, but I know you and I have bought digital files off Image before they were fully on Comixology. But you were able to buy whatever it was called, like you could buy the CBR or a PDF or whatever the Amazon file was.
No, they'd give them all to you.
Yeah. And then just upload it to your app of choice to read it.
That's a great point, though. Yeah, you're right. Image was doing that on their site. And I switched to Comixology long before they announced that they were stopping all that. Just because I needed a central repository. I was getting a little tired of having to manage all this through my own library. I wanted it to sync quick, faster. And just have that repository build up over time. Where was I going with this? I had another
multi-file thing. Well, to some extent, like just to add on to my point there is like, I probably buy more music through Bandcamp now, because Bandcamp, it lets me feel like I'm supporting the creators of this music directly. I mean, I am. I shouldn't just feel that way. I am doing that. I can download the choice of file I want. I mean, 100% of the time,
Yep.
I upload those things to Google Play.
Yep.
And even if that thing was already available on Google Play, I know like, it's like, hey, I'm just helping this artist. I'm buying this album. I'm downloading it. I'm putting it here. That's the case where I like that. But I recognize that's not how sort of your average consumer feels about it. So your average, when Image did that with the multi-file formats, they were totally, taking themselves out of the average consumer game. Like your average Comixology person is probably not going to take those extra steps to go to a website, buy a file, download it, then figure out how to import it into their reader. It's, it's a lot.
You're right. Well, one of the big factors we're sort of leaving out of this discussion is, and it's unique to comics too, which is the well-run local comic shop.
Yeah.
And people go, but there's bookstores. Yes, but bookstores are much more generalist venues. If you've never been in a good local comic shop, it's like walking into a good local wine store. Like the selection is impeccable. You're going to get usually a very strong sense of the owner's point of view. Like it's wonderful. And we've talked about that in past episodes, and hopefully we'll be able to start featuring more of those places here. But like that is an experience where you're there. It's almost like buying the book in a really well-run store is sort of the souvenir of that moment. It's like there's a really cool feel-good thing. If you walk into a great store and you're inspired, walking out empty-handed is almost like impossible. Like you can't do it. You feel like you're wasting a huge opportunity to like be enlightened or something. So you kind of stretch this, like you almost have this baked in amplifier of ownership in these stores that no other media has ever had. I mean, like, music used to, obviously, and does not anymore. For them, I mean, Grimey's in Nashville was, excluded.
Yeah, actually, that was exactly the example I was about to give too. I was going to say, well, like Grimey's in Nashville or like Third Man, like to feel that sense of curation in it. And I'll say that to me, and I'm not talking business model stuff, but one of the reasons that like Borders totally failed, and I have always
are we going to talk about Borders? One of my favorite things.
I know you and I have talked about.
I'm going to direct a documentary on the downfall of Borders. That's going to be my Netflix success story. But
I got an insider for you.
Do you know?
Yeah, one of the clerks. Anyway, no. Borders to me, like Best Buy is another great example. Mm-hmm. Best Buy saw the threat of the internet. Borders saw the threat of the internet, and what they tried to do was like be the internet in a physical shop. And it's like, but you didn't make the user experience any better.
Yeah,
you don't have everything. Like the actual thing they should have done was run the other way and do what comic book stores are doing. Now we'll get into this more in our next single shot where we talk about like digital versus physical and stuff like that. But there are business reasons why comic book shops exist the way they do and why all things are not available on Comixology Unlimited. Yeah. But comic shops still exist as that like great curated spot like that you're talking about. And in my mind, when we bring up like Grimey's and Third Man and Parnassus in Nashville has that, which is owned or at least was founded by the author Ann Patchett, and it's a small bookstore, and you have that curated feeling when you go in, And I bought 2 physical books this weekend when I was there because both of them are like beautifully printed. And, one of them was one of the staff picks and the other one was displayed on the shelf. And it was like, wow, this is exactly what I get in almost every comic book shop.
Yeah.
But not in many. I never got it in a big bookstore. When you went to Borders and you saw the table set up for display, like that was just the garbage that was like on sale from the corporate masters. It wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
I mean, seriously, like when I go in a Barnes and Noble to buy like a blank notebook or something, I see those tables of just trash out that's like 10% off. And oh my God, how many years did I fall for this? They
were like, oh God, it's like those books that are like, on the surface seem kind of amusingly interesting. And you're like, wait, why would I ever need this? Like, and it's like repackaged public domain information, but with like quirky graphics or something. And you're like, oh yeah, no, I don't need this. But okay, let's let's bang through. There's some key questions that I think will coalesce a lot of these thoughts. Bang through them. I have listed here like 5 or 6 of them. I said owning comics or graphic novels is a statement. It makes you more of an art collector and less a book owner for most people, in parentheses. What are your thoughts on that statement?
Like I said, I agree so much that I think you have talked me into the ownership of certain digital artifacts that I own, of like, oh, you're right. That's definitely the argument for me owning Unnatural Volume 1.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And it's like you and I have talked about before, there exists a hardcover version of Scotty Young's Oz, or he was the artist on it at least.
Oh yeah.
Which is this beautiful, our friend Drew has been talking to us about. You can listen to Drew on our Vision episode. I don't remember what number that is, but I have been wishing for a similar thing with Scotty Young's I Hate Fairyland.
Yeah.
But they have not quite omnibus editions, but they have like collected hardback editions. And it's really nice looking, right? I want the big, huge, fat one that's got every volume in it, you know?
It looks like a Mother Seuss book or something. Like,
oh, that would be awesome.
Imagine if they did it like like antique book binding or something. Oh, that could be, and they could sell it for $60, and God, I'd buy it.
That Oz thing retails for $125.
What?
I don't remember the deal that Drew had on it, but yeah, wow. I was in a comic shop like a week after he recommended it to us, and I saw it in person and went, "Holy crap!" Like this is
neat. I couldn't think of. I've talked about Tale of Sand on this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I'm like, I could never imagine having that digitally only.
No.
It's like I have so many books on my shelf which were purchased with this in mind, but it's like you do kind of feel like you're putting together a library, but you're also curating an art collection. Like I kind of feel like I'm a gallery owner in some respects, and it's here and this here, and it's that extra duality that I think the regular books. If you're really into antique books, you'll probably disagree, but for most people, like regular books are never going to achieve that.
Yeah. Well, and tacking onto that, plus the idea of the comic shop is like this curated, museum kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's where like those indie publishers, like Drawn and Quarterly, or I think it's called Archaea. And you've mentioned, is Mobius the publisher of those?
No, Humanoids.
No, Humanoids, right? Mobius is the creator. But those, like a lot of times those indie publishers go out of their way to make that artifact. I mean, every Drawn and Quarterly book, almost every one without fail, is so beautiful. It's like you want it on your shelf. It's not just a DC or Marvel trade paperback. And as much as I love Image, and as much as beautiful as their art is, they are just like above average trade paperbacks. Like for something like Fairyland or whatever, I want more than that. I want like the artifact that makes it worth keeping on the shelf.
I had started a conversation a couple weeks ago with somebody on Instagram in one of the threads, and I was like, Image, because think about how many amazing single issue covers and variants have come out under the Image name. They could do some seriously gorgeous, like limited edition, almost coffee table book collections of all these variant covers that just are ridiculously. They could do 10 volume sets of these things and sell them for 100. There's so many things Image could do that would, benefit their creators and like just create, substreams that a lot of us would buy instantly, immediately. It's baffling to me that they don't. And there's any number of reasons why they wouldn't, but it just baffles me to me that that's not a priority, or they don't have somebody thinking about that. Any of these places don't. Think about. DC does, but it's almost kind of an afterthought in a lot of ways. There's the idea of highlighting the artifact. I think Drawn and Quarterly, like you said, does it beautifully. Like they are they're kind of the gold standard in a lot of ways.
I think so. Without peer. They're amazing.
Consistently. There are some really good like independent studios that do, custom work for different releases, but Drawn and Quarterly as a publishing company seems to really get it. And I think, that I would love to see, I hope if you're ever listening to this and you're this person, please let us know. I would love to find a listener who is like, has every Drawn and Quarterly book hardcover like in their library. I want to see, or if the Drawn and Quarterly offices have just like, this massive, just wonderful library of all this stuff. I might pee a little.
Well, I'm telling you, like find the table, the Drawn and Quarterly table at any Comic-Con where they are, and contrast it with, not just like DC Marvel, that's a whole showbiz thing, like their booths, but contrast it with, it's not Image, but who am I thinking of? One of those that has a bunch of like action comic books and stuff where they're so disposable in that way versus Drawn and Quarterly, where it's like majority hardbound books of different and varying sizes, it's such a breath of fresh air. For real.
Next thing, or next point, does ownership strengthen your love of a book?
Well, I think for me, I sort of touched on this earlier. It sort of signifies a love of a book. I don't know that if I buy it first, it helps me love it, but it's like, if I love it, I want to own it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Totally.
What about you?
Definitely. I definitely have books that I had purchased almost like, it's like the spoils of war. Like, yes, like these are great works.
Right.
And now I own them. I definitely have those, but there are a couple on this shelf that I sort of got sight unseen for whatever reason, and ended up loving. So they just, it's almost like, ooh, I'm glad now I own it too. But this was a gamble. Like, I didn't know. And there's a couple. I'm fortunate in that I've only, I don't purge my shelf very often. I purge my single issues more than anything, but my trades stay pretty much consistent. I might shed 2 or 3 a year. And sometimes that's because I upgrade. I take 2 trades and I may get the omnibus or something. So that's almost like an upgrade. But like, very rarely do I just get rid of a trade because I'm like, it just didn't do it for me. If I'm that unsure about a book, I'll get it digitally. Just so then if it is crappy, it doesn't have to take up space, and then I still have it. Yeah. Like I bought DK2, Dark. What is that?
The noir one, the Strikes Again, or
no, the crappy follow up.
DK3.
No. Dark Knight Strikes Again. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I bought that. I bought that as a digital noir version just because I'm like, no one should own this physically. Like, it's so bad. So it's like, just having it as a digital thing is almost like a little rite of passage purchase, in some ways.
I'm happy that I did not purchase a physical copy of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah, after I read that digital version, it was like, whew, I have been dodging a bullet for 30 years and didn't even know it. Because I can't tell you how many times I've picked that up on a shelf at a comic book store and been like, you know what? I just got to get this and read it. And then I'm like, $40. I don't know.
Exactly. They've gotten really crafty at like really packaging it. Like, this
exactly
is for you to own, it's like, this is like the Watchmen.
Yeah. The Alex Ross cover and the Golden Centennial edition or whatever the hell it's called. And you're like, oh man. But I'll tell you, but on the flip side of that, maybe this is like leads into the next question you have on there. We've definitely talked about it a lot in this episode and others. There are probably, how do I want to say this? I want to say there's more books I've read digitally that I now want to own the physical copy of than there are, than it works the other way. Like, it's more likely that a digital read, for a cheaper amount will lead to me purchasing the physical book as well. Yeah. And I have a great example from my experiment with Comixology Unlimited, which is Mouse Guard, which I have just ignored for almost 20 years. Like, this thing started in like 2005 or 2007 or something. Okay, maybe not 20 years, 12 years. And I've seen it everywhere. This thing is ubiquitous. And I just, I was like, it's about mice. That's right. Mice. And they carry swords. And what do I care? But I started reading it and was like, this is beautiful. And I need the physical copy now. And not only do I need the physical copy, I'm like, I need another one for my niece and nephew. And I need, this should be the child gift for someone else. And like, it's great. And the fact is, like, I got that on Unlimited, but if I had, even if I'd paid like, I don't know, under $10 for it digitally, I would still have that feeling of wanting it physically. Those books that I'm going to read for free and not want the physical edition of, I never would pay money for them. It's like you and I've talked about the V for Vendetta, legendary book. Yeah. You may own it. I've never bought it because I think the art is trash.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
it is, and I do. But that's a tricky one because it is that, Alan Moore specifically transcends this a little bit more than usual for me too, where it's like, if it's an Alan Moore important book, I have to own it no matter what. And you get V for Vendetta. I mean, because with Watchmen, absolutely, own the whatever the limited edition hardcover.
Well, I think contrasting those is perfect, because it's like, even if I read V for Vendetta digitally for, quote, free on Comixology Unlimited, I wouldn't want to buy it.
Yeah.
But if I read Watchmen on Unlimited, I would definitely want to go buy it. I would be like, this has to sit on my shelf, even if I don't read it again. It's just
100%. I have a lot of books like that where I was just like, oh no, I have to own this, or I should have owned. A lot of times that was because, like, they're not like us. I a couple single issues. I'm like, no, this has to be consumed in this format. Yeah. We've beaten the discussion to death, and we'll probably have another one here soon about digital and physical. So I don't want to get too into that. But
I definitely want to quote the genius Courtney Love, who's back in the Napster like controversy days. She had this great quote. I mean, give her credit where it's due, which was, as far as I'm concerned, only on this one quote. And she said, the only people this is going to like that file sharing is going to hurt are the people that are like the one-hit wonders. For so long, the music business model was organized around a group just having one hit on a record. Yeah. And then there'd be 9 pieces of shit, but you would have to pay $19.99 for the CD. And she was like, that's who it's going to hurt, because those people are just going to go on Napster, download the one song they like. And to me, that makes, that's sort of like, I'm sort of the same argument I'm dancing around, which is like, if you have a crappy book and I get it for free in some way, I was never going to pay for it. Yeah. It's like a quality control kind of thing.
It's like, all these people, all the money we're losing. I'm like, those
exactly.
Buy it to begin with. What are you talking about? Like, it's just false equivalency all around. That was awful. But okay, that's an interesting transition point to this question. Does a subscription service make comics more ephemeral over time? Meaning, right now we think of them very much as like this collected thing, whether it's a single issue that's, it's a collection of 10 to 14 pages that does this thing. If it's subscription based, the idea of a book only exists because that was the most convenient economic way to translate ideas or story for this format. And some books are, massive, and some of them aren't. Some of those Drawn Quarterly books I have are ridiculous. Like Scott McCloud's, Sculptor. I mean, but so it's like, when you're free of that convention, with comics especially, do comics just become this kind of ephemeral thing that just that you just sort of, you jump in the pool when you want to just experience it all, and then you jump out, but it's not like a book that you own. And does the idea of a subscription condition a whole generation of people to start thinking that way?
Well, for me, no. And my argument would be, the idea that comics are like a bigger collected edition of artwork or something like that is really a recent, thing. Like, when you think of like comics are in the form that they are as floppy issues, specifically because they're throwaway garbage. They were printed on this, cheap paper with this, cheap ink in this cheap 4-color way. Like, they were made to be ephemeral. It's only in sort of recent days, and like, driven a lot by nostalgia and very talented creators breaking the forms, that we've come to experience it as like a collectible or, an artifact worth preserving. But
Mr. Glass way of looking at comics.
Is that what he does?
I put up on Instagram of Sam Jackson's Mr. Glass and Unbreakable holding up a comic book with his quote where he goes in the movie, "This is a piece of art." It's in the beginning scene when he's talking to the dad who's buying the thing. He's in his shop, and his shop is basically an art gallery. It's called Limited Edition. This guy walks in and he's going to buy this like original sketch drawing of like this famous comics issue. And he's like, "My son's going to love it." And he's like, "Come again?" He's like, "My son." He's like, "How old is your son?" He's like, "Oh, he's 4. He's like, No. And he basically rips this guy a new asshole. And at the end of his spiel, his monologue to this guy, he goes, "This is an art gallery, sir." And he points at it defiantly. He goes, "And this is a piece of art. And he kicks him out. And so I was just like, I put up on Instagram, I'm like, he's the original comic sommelier.
Yeah, oh yeah, I did. I saw that, of course. But
but really, like I love that character because that really does, like, he's a little extreme, but he does sum up that sort of that viewpoint of like, this is way more legitimate when it's done well. Especially, this is like a beautiful slice of media that like is very unique and very sort of sui generis in all the right ways.
Well, I love that description now because because it reminds me of being the guy, the chauffeur, when a few years ago, when my niece was like 4 years old or something, and I bought like a Star Wars collectible figure at a comic book shop with her, and immediately handed it to her to open. Oh. And I'm sure the clerk was like, "What the fuck?" Like it was still in the package, and it wasn't like a 1970s one or something.
Oh, okay, all right.
But it was still obviously preserved. It was not a new figure like from a current line. And I was like, "Yeah, well, it's Princess Leia. She loves Princess Leia. Like, here you go, rip it open." She lost the gun like immediately.
Oh God! Yeah. The guys are like, "Okay, I'm going to sell the gun for like $10, missing for the one person who's missing the gun."
I think the other thing that occurs to me is I actually, the problem I think is that digital ephemera is like more hazardous to us because it doesn't actually disappear and disintegrate. It's like when they were physical objects and you lose it, or it gets water damage or something, and it's just gone. Like there's something kind of beautiful about that, sort of like mandala art or whatever, sand mandalas. But like it just goes away. But the problem I have is that I have all this like sort of digital clutter on my Kindle, and eventually will in Comixology or whatever other digital libraries, where I can't ever clear that cache. Like it's always going to be, there's like a little bit that's always going to be in my brain that's like, yeah, you own Sicario on video or whatever. It's like, why do I have that in my Google Play library? Can I just give it back?
Interesting.
Not that it wasn't great, but I'm never going to watch it again. I don't know. It's almost not ephemeral enough.
Yeah.
But it will be when I quit my unlimited subscription. All those things that I borrowed are just going to disappear off my iPad, and then
that takes us logically to like the final question which you asked, which is, doesn't the subscription model take away a huge social component of books lending? And I'll add one more step to that, which is, owning books especially, but I think I'm going to be selfish and say owning comics as well. It probably is more so. Is really like, when you pass on, it's a statement about you as a person that can go on, can be disseminated. Those books can go on. They can either stay, collected, or can go to a library as a collect. So when it's a subscription service, when you stop paying the subscription, it just goes away. Like there's no marker of you having ever interacted with that in physical space. And so it's something about that seems a little sad, but to your point, the lending situation is highly compressed. It's not the same at all.
Yeah. Amazon has a really imperfect way of lending Kindle books.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
But, and I've only ever successfully lent maybe 2 Kindle singles, to my dad.
Yeah.
But I'm not even aware of any way to do that on Comixology. It may exist, but it's definitely not, in the main menu and front and center and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know. There's just something so cool about being like, have you read this? And just handing someone a comic book. I think that takes away from the original spirit of comic books, where you think of you think of like the Stand By Me boys, walking down the train tracks with one Hulk comic book between them. I don't know if that actually happens. I can just picture it. And, like, it's just been passed from all of their hands. It's like, that's how they all read everything, I have a stack of my dad's comic books from the 50s, and they are torn to shit.
Yeah.
And it's like so crazy to look at this and go, yeah, I got like Batman number 53, but it is fucking ruined. And when I was a little kid, we went into this comic book shop in Nashville and took this stack of comics. I don't know why I would never do that today, to just like, it doesn't matter what they're actually worth. It's like, no, it's just that, having that artifact, that's cool, but they were worth nothing at the time because they were
bring that up. Follow me on this journey. Comics, as we've established, comics straddle two very distinct mediums of their own, books and art, right? But there's a third one that really satisfied what you just described that we've never mentioned or I've never brought up on the show, and that is baseball cards.
Oh
Baseball
yeah,
cards, the
collectible.
collectability, the trading of them, the sort of the status symbol of certain cards and certain spaces, like all of that is I mean, it was funny. I came to that conclusion a couple of years ago. I was like, man, why am I suddenly really into comics and graphic novels again? Oh, I understand, because I was a big sports cards kid as growing up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my god, this is just that refocused on this stuff, and I'm much more sophisticated to kind of really do it right, where I wouldn't have been necessarily as a kid. So it's like, oh, this is fun. But like that sports card thing, and I bring that up specifically because sports cards are one of the very few things in media that will not and have not ever translated into a digital space. Obviously, subscription service for cards, a digital subscription makes no sense. But even like, people have tried to replicate sports cards digitally and just it fails immediately. It's just, you have to have the card. And there's always going to be a pull of that in comics. The only way to really do that right is to physically own it.
Yeah.
And I say physically because it's so easy to replicate digital stuff that to have to satisfy that third arm, that sports card, baseball card arm of what comics are.
Yeah.
You have to have the ownership of it. I mean,
you have to have real scarcity, which is we only made 500 sets of this.
Yeah.
And like when you're at a Comic-Con, and I mean, I like, God bless all the creators that just have prints of their work. Like I know that they economically have to do that, but it definitely means something more when you get a print from your favorite artist and it's numbered, and especially out of a limited run, or it's like, I only made these prints for, San Diego Comic-Con 2011. And you're like, oh, I got it. I remember I used to buy Adam Hughes' sketchbook every year. He would have like a con sketchbook, like here's the 2011, here's the 2012, here's whatever. And then I realized like, oh, I can come back next year and just buy all the ones that I missed because he's still selling the ones he didn't sell out of. And it became much less like a need on my part. Like, oh, well, there's a library of it. It's not actually scarce. Like, and I kind of stopped buying them. That actual scarcity definitely like gives it meaning,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's great, but but I think there's something we'll talk about in our next episode when we get more into like the digital versus print dilemma, which is what radically changed in the last couple of years was that comics got better on digital than they were before that. And I know the big argument against digital for me several years ago was just the experience didn't translate. And obviously the digital creators realized that. And instead of trying to translate the experience, they built a new one with guided view. And now that we have a unique to digital way of consuming comics, it's become harder to resist, I think.
Well, not to dig us into a hole, but like take that notion, kind of going back to the ephemeral sort of question. If everything's guided view, if the really good stuff is guided view driven digitally, and imagine the Jonathan Hickmans of 2030, never produce a book. You just, and this takes us back to the multiple subscription things, but you just subscribe to Jonathan Hickman, and he may have 3 titles, and you're like, I want whatever his new version of East to West is, I want that. And there's never an issue, there's never issues, there's never books, it is literally like whenever he and whoever his artists are just come up with, or he himself come up with panels, they just appear. So you may get an alert one morning and there's like 6 new panels. So there's an update. So you're like, okay, cool. And you just literally, it's just a trail of breadcrumbs as you go. And as wherever the spirit takes him, the ephemerality of that is very interesting, but it's just like, because it's a subscription, the business model, of people constantly sort of tuning in gives him sort of the runway to keep going versus, hey, I'm going to put out this book and this is the plan. And I can only print them if I make X amount of money. Yeah. And that subscription, platform does change the way creators create and the frequency of it. And there is something to that, which may, And it may come down to the creator. Like, hey, I can only think in terms of a book. That's fine. But some of the newer creators, the kids being born now who have no concept of a physical book, who are free to kind of do whatever. That's the most interesting thing to think about. And then how do you even in those situations, how do you take that work and package it as a historical statement? How do you leave it for other generations to find long after, the digital thing is disrupted and changed? I don't know.
Oh my God. All I want to do is end it right there, because that is such a great ending for that conversation. Because we knew this is not a Pepsi versus Coke where we're going to come up with a final, answer to the query. We knew it's like, we're just going to ask more questions. And those questions, insofar as they are questions, summed it up, I think. Yeah. And I would direct listeners, if you're interested in this, almost 3 years and 3 months ago, you and I had a conversation called The Future of Storytelling in the Novel, where we talked about a lot of stuff. That was episode number 11.
Wow.
Go check that out in our archives. And while you are scrolling back through there, where can people find us, Taylor?
This podcast is wherever podcasts are found. We prefer Pocket Cast, Google Play, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, all of those wonderful places. Subscribe to Panelism. If you like us, share it with your friends. Tell them about the show. You can follow us on Instagram. We are at panelism.inc. And having a lot of fun there. A lot of new folks finding the show there and going back to old episodes. So welcome if you're new to the show. And then if you want all of our stuff, it is just simply www.panelism.inc. That is the website. And you can find all our stuff there and more stuff to come.
Excellent. Until the next episode.
I was waiting for until the next episode.
I was actually waiting for you to say so.
Oh.
I don't know why I just thought that'll cue you for a great